Hello everybody, Strategic Operative here. Today I'm going to be talking about the Tarkin Doctrine in Star Wars Armada, and as Imperial players, how to play the Star Wars Tarkin Doctrine. Now, the first thing you have to realize, that with the Tarkin Doctrine, looking at it as a tabletop game versus Star Wars lore, is that if you're an Imperial player or a Rebel player, both sides start with a base 400-point fleet. So the Empire does not have an advantage in number, so you can take that context out of lore. However, when you're looking at a tabletop game for Star Wars Armada, the Empire, when you're looking at the Tarkin Doctrine, you want to focus on the Concentrate Fire token, or the command dial, as it is. The whole concept of the Tarkin Doctrine is to overpower and overwhelm your enemy with an abundance of dice. That's literally what it is. It's an offensive attack. So if you're an offensive player, the Tarkin Doctrine might actually work best for you. To give you an example, the idea here is to consolidate your fleet into less ships that can put out more dice than your opponent. The three things you want to have in mind here is, number one, you want to put out more dice. You want to consolidate your fleet to where there's less margin of error when you're maneuvering ships. Also, you want to be first player. That is something that sometimes doesn't make sense with your first point of making sure you're putting out the most dice, because that requires you to have the more powerful ship variances, the better upgrades which cost more points, and better commanders which cost more points. However, if you start tweaking with your list a little bit, and I do have a few lists already up that concern the Tarkin Doctrine in fleet building, you can get a pretty strong Imperial list running about 370, 380 points, almost guaranteeing you going first in the game, which is really good. That's step number one you need for the Tarkin Doctrine. You have to go first, because you have to pick the objectives in the game. You have to take lead. You want the enemy to try covering up what you're doing. They're reacting, you are acting in this game. That is number one for the Tarkin Doctrine within Star Wars Armada. Number two, of course, your dice output. You need to put more dice on the board, essentially, to where you can one-shot almost any ship in the game. Ideally, you want ISDs. Simons are some of the best ships in the game for using the Tarkin Doctrine, because you could throw so many red dice out the front. I think right now the limit is 8 red dice, possibly 9 when we look at the new ship variances and the new titles that are coming out with the SSD fleet. Thirdly, an actual strategy you want to look at if you're using the Tarkin Doctrine is actually a quote from the Tarkin book that Tarkin states. He says, "You don't worry about the problem right in front of you. You worry about the root of the problem." Now, the way I'm taking this in tabletop gaming is looking at squadrons. The Tarkin Doctrine does not believe in huge squadrons. It just uses ties, which is honestly really bad for the game. So usually that's why I don't run any squadrons at all. The idea and the mindset is you take out the carriers. You take out the root problem before the problem that's in front of you actually kills and destroys you. Now, that's easier said than done, and if you look at a lot of my battle reports, you'll find that where the margin of error that I make is always on the squadron part. It is always, I was 1-2 dice off of taking out their carrier in one shot, and as a result of that, the problem that was right in front of me totally destroys me. So there isn't a perfect scenario right now for Star Wars Armada currently that deals with squadrons still keeping in line with the Tarkin Doctrine. That's why I push so hard that I really want to see a ship in the game that just focuses on anti-squadron capabilities, that has nothing to do with ship combat. That's something I really want to see, and that would actually fix a lot of holes in the Tarkin Doctrine currently right now for Star Wars Armada that I wouldn't have to use. Squads, because that would free up points. Secondarily, what's also really going to help the Tarkin Doctrine is the SSD, because you are consolidating your fleet. You are getting huge damage and dice out of the front 3 hull zones of the SSD. I think it's going to be 10 red dice, 10 red dice, and possibly on the sides you can get up to 8 or 9 red dice, which is really good. The Tarkin Doctrine focuses primarily on taking out your enemy before it comes to you. That is a huge thing you want in this game. As you see, the meta right now is mainly red dice, and I believe it's going to be more strong and more heavily red dice geared once the SSD comes out, especially for Imperial players. The Rebel players, we're still waiting for news from FFG to hear what, how the meta is going to change for the Rebels right now, but currently there's not that much fluctuation, but that's good for Tarkin Doctrine players, because then you could build accordingly with your red dice fleet. So pretty much the three things you just want to keep in mind when using the Tarkin Doctrine is going first in the game, which requires you to have a lower number of points in your fleet, but you want to get the best ships you can and put pretty much have the biggest output of dice. You want to be able to put more dice out than your opponent can. That's sometimes hard when you're going up against another Imperial player, but it is sometimes manageable. So those two, although they contradict each other in a way, there is that middle zone that you want to try finding, and it works differently for every other player. Every individual person likes to go a little bit on the point-wise. Some people like to go more heavily diced, but it's really up to your preference, and you have to be willing sometimes that you're not going to get that first preference. You still have to be able to command your fleet and not just be crushed because you didn't get first player. That can't be an option either. Also, you want to remember that squadrons are not your main priority. They're carriers. Whatever the objective is in the game, you want to focus towards, because you are the Tarkin Doctrine is more focusing on what your objectives are and taking out their largest ship. And of course, like I said, you deal with the root problem. Their capital ship that their commander's on, or if you feel squads are going to be a threat to you, eliminate whatever's boosting them. If it's a GR-75 with Bomber Command Center, you want to take that out. If it's an MC-80 that's running as a carrier, you need to take that out. That is your main focus in the game. So those are just some pointers for a Tarkin Doctrine player or somebody who's looking to play more thematical with the Tarkin Doctrine in the game. Let me know what you guys think, if you agree with these 3 points, using the Tarkin Doctrine within Star Wars Armada. I know it's a little bit different than in lore Star Wars, the Tarkin Doctrine, because in the game, everything is equal. The Empire is just as capable as the Rebels because you start with that 400 points in the beginning to build your fleet. So there's no, one side does not have the advantage over the other, unlike in Star Wars lore. However, I do want to put a video up soon, of course, about the Thrawn Doctrine in Star Wars Armada, which is another really cool aspect. I tried playing it, and that's where I use my Raiders a lot of times, is using the Thrawn Doctrine. But my favorite, my most success thus far in the game, and what I really love playing truly, is the Tarkin Doctrine. And let me know if you guys actually play the Tarkin Doctrine, or what other doctrine you think that you guys play that helps you the most in the game.